I remember the day my wife, Julia, started acting differently. It wasn't anything obvious at first, no late-night disappearances or mysterious text messages, just subtle changes. She stopped laughing at my jokes, even the ones she used to find hilarious, and our conversations, once filled with inside jokes and lighthearted banter, became painfully polite. Julia and I had been married for nearly 10 years. We had built a life together, a life I thought was happy. We both had stable careers, shared interests, and a close-knit group of friends. And we had trust. At least, that's what I believed. I never doubted her loyalty. She was always the dependable one, the planner, the one who remembered birthdays and anniversaries. But as time went on, it felt like I was living with a stranger. I tried not to overthink it. Everyone goes through rough patches, right? That's what I told myself. Maybe it was just stress from work, or maybe she was feeling restless, stuck in the monotony of daily life. But one morning, I noticed something that set off alarm bells I couldn't ignore. Julia had developed a new morning routine. Normally, she'd get up, shower, grab a quick breakfast, and head to work, usually just giving me a quick peck on the cheek as she rushed out the door. But now, she spent a lot more time getting ready, staring at herself in the mirror, doing her hair, and putting on makeup. And it wasn't just any makeup. It was the kind of effort she only put in on special occasions. One day, I jokingly asked, "Are you trying to impress someone at work?" Her reaction was almost too defensive. "Can't a girl just want to look good for herself?" she snapped, not even glancing up from the mirror. I let it go, but her words gnawed at me all day. There was something in her tone, something different. That night, I tried to bring it up again. We were sitting on the couch, half watching a Netflix series we'd been following for weeks. I turned to her, trying to keep my tone casual. "Hey, is everything okay? You seem distant lately." She laughed it off, brushing a hand through her hair. "You're imagining things?" "Work's just been crazy, that's all." But I wasn't imagining it, and she knew it. Then came the business trip. Julia's company occasionally sent her out of town, but it was rare. She was in finance, and most of her work didn't require travel. So when she mentioned she'd be gone for 3 days, I didn't question it at first. I even helped her pack, throwing in her favorite snacks for the road and wishing her a safe trip. The first night we exchanged a few texts, and she called me before going to bed. She sounded a bit rushed, almost distracted, but I shrugged it off. The next day, her texts became shorter, fewer, and she didn't call me at all that night. I texted her around 10 p.m., asking how her day went. She didn't respond until the following morning, saying she'd fallen asleep early. Again, I tried to ignore the nagging feeling that something was off. When she returned, I thought everything would go back to normal, but instead she seemed even more distant. It felt like a switch had flipped. That's when I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through her phone. I know. Trust is the cornerstone of any relationship, and by snooping, I was betraying that trust. But I needed to know if I was just being paranoid. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't telling me. At first, I found nothing unusual, just messages with her friends, some emails from work. But then I saw her texts with someone named Alex. I hadn't heard her mention anyone by that name before, so I clicked on the conversation. Most of it was harmless, work-related stuff, but there were a few messages that made my heart race. Alex: "Last night was amazing. When can I see you again?" Julia: "Soon. Let's keep this between us for now." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My first instinct was to storm into the bedroom and confront her, but I stopped myself. I needed to be sure before I did anything drastic. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe there was an explanation. I decided to keep quiet and gather more information. Over the next few weeks, I kept an eye on her without being too obvious. I started noticing more and more signs. The way she would smile at her phone, quickly put it away when I walked into the room, or the times she'd stay late at work but wouldn't respond to my calls or texts. The excuses piled up, each one more flimsy than the last. One night, she told me she was going to have a girls' night with her friend Lisa, but something didn't add up. Lisa and I were pretty close, and usually she'd let me know if they were going out. So I texted Lisa, casually asking if they were having fun. She responded almost immediately, "What do you mean? I'm at home with the kids." That was the final straw. My hands shook as I put down my phone. I'd tried to be patient, tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, but now there was no denying it. Julia was lying to me, and I needed to know why. The next day, I called in sick to work. I told Julia I'd be home resting, but as soon as she left, I followed her. She drove across town, heading into a part of the city I barely recognized. Eventually, she pulled into a small, upscale hotel. My heart was pounding as I watched her get out of the car, looking around nervously before heading inside. And then, not 2 minutes later, Alex showed up. I knew it was him. I'd seen his name pop up enough times on her phone. He looked younger than me, sharp-dressed, the kind of guy who probably knew all the right things to say. I felt my stomach drop as they walked into the hotel together. I waited in the car, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Part of me wanted to barge in, to confront them both right then and there. But another part of me needed time to think, to figure out what I was going to do. Sitting in my car outside that hotel, I felt a hurricane of emotions tearing through me. Anger, betrayal, humiliation. How could Julia, the woman I'd shared my life with, be doing this? I replayed the last few months in my head, trying to pinpoint the exact moment things had changed. Was it something I'd done? Something I hadn't seen coming? Or had this been hiding under the surface all along? As much as I wanted to confront her on the spot, I knew barging in without a plan would only lead to a scene I wasn't prepared to handle. I needed proof. So instead, I did what any sane person would do in this insane situation. I waited. Hours slipped by, and eventually she came out of the hotel with Alex. They laughed, looking at each other like star-crossed lovers sneaking around on some grand adventure. My blood boiled. She was mine. She was supposed to be mine. And here she was, acting like I didn't even exist. When she finally got home that evening, I was waiting on the couch, my hands clasped tightly, trying to stay calm. "Hey," she said casually as she entered, avoiding eye contact as she dropped her bag on the table. "How are you feeling? Still sick?" I forced a smile, my heart pounding. "Yeah, I'm better now." She gave me a half smile and went into the kitchen, moving around as if nothing were wrong. The calmness in her behavior was disturbing. It was like I didn't exist in her reality anymore, like she was so comfortable with her lie that it didn't matter if I was here or not. "Julia," I called out, my voice barely holding steady. She looked up from the fridge. "Yeah? Can we talk?" She hesitated, closing the fridge slowly. "Sure, what's up?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I know about Alex." Her face went blank, like a mask had just fallen over her features. For a second, I thought she'd deny it, laugh it off, tell me I was crazy. But she didn't. Instead, she sighed, moving to sit down across from me. "All right," she said, folding her hands on her lap. "I guess I owe you an explanation." I blinked, the coolness in her tone slicing through me. "You guess? That's all you have to say?" Julia shifted uncomfortably but didn't break eye contact. "It's complicated." "Then make it simple for me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me the truth. What happened?" She looked away for a moment, biting her lip before meeting my gaze again. "I didn't plan for this to happen, it just did. Alex understands me in a way I didn't even realize I needed. We connect on a different level." Her words stung, each one twisting the knife deeper. "And that justifies sneaking around behind my back?" Her expression softened, a glimmer of guilt flickering in her eyes. "No, it doesn't. I should have talked to you about what I was feeling, but I was scared. I didn't want to hurt you," I scoffed. "You didn't want to hurt me? Julia, you've been lying to me for months. Do you know what it's been like for me, feeling like something was wrong but trying to convince myself I was imagining it?" She flinched, finally looking remorseful. I'm sorry, really, I am, but we can't go back. I think it's time we both move on." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. "Move on?" I repeated, my voice hoarse. "You've already decided that, haven't you?" She nodded, looking down at her hands. "I think it's what's best for both of us." At that moment, I felt a part of me snap, a coldness settling over my heart. It was as if the love I'd once felt for her had evaporated, leaving only the ashes of betrayal behind. I stood up, pacing the room, my mind racing with anger and a need for some kind of revenge. Then an idea struck me. One so twisted and unexpected that it actually made me smile, if only for a second. I turned to her, the words falling out before I could second-guess myself. "You're right," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Maybe it is time we both move on, but let's do it on fair terms." She raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting me to agree so readily. "Fair terms?" "Yes. If we're really going to separate, I think we should take some time to figure out what that means, financially, emotionally, everything. Give me a week to get my things in order, and then we can talk about next steps. Does that sound fair?" She seemed surprised but nodded. "Yeah, I think that's fair." Little did she know, I was already planning my revenge. Over the next few days, I acted as though everything was normal. I went to work, came home, made dinner, all while keeping a close eye on Julia's behavior. I needed her to think I was calm and reasonable, that I was ready to let her go without a fight. She didn't realize I was biding my time, preparing for something far more satisfying than a messy confrontation. What she didn't know was that I'd already contacted my lawyer and started digging into her financial records. I wanted to know everything about this new life she wanted. And that's when I found something that shifted my perspective entirely. In the bank statements, I noticed a strange series of transfers over the past year. Every month, a significant amount of money was going into a separate account I didn't recognize. My pulse quickened as I looked up the account details, only to find it was in Julia's name and Alex's. For a moment, I sat there, stunned, staring at the evidence on my computer screen. She wasn't just having an affair, she was siphoning off money from our joint account into a secret fund with her lover. They were planning to build a life together, using the very resources I'd worked hard to save. My shock quickly turned to fury, and I knew exactly how I'd get back at her. Now, knowing about that secret account, my anger transformed into something colder, something calculated. Julia and Alex hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. They were trying to build a life together on my dime. Every dollar they'd taken from me was like a physical punch to my pride, but that was going to change. I knew exactly what I needed to do. The next day, I called a friend of mine, Liam, who happened to be an IT consultant with a talent for finding information people would rather keep hidden. I didn't tell him all the details, but he understood enough. He owed me one anyway, and I trusted him. All I had to say was, "Can you get me access to Julia's emails?" And he responded with a simple, "I'll see what I can do." While Liam worked his magic, I went about my days with a new energy. I still played the part of the calm, forgiving husband, giving Julia space to go about her new life. She took my supposed indifference as compliance, assuming I was content to let her leave without a fight. But I was far from indifferent. Each smile I gave her, each casual conversation, every breakfast we shared was all part of the setup. A few days later, Liam called me up. "Got it," he said, his voice laced with triumph. "Her emails, everything she's been sending and receiving." I felt a thrill run through me as I opened my laptop, logging into the secure account Liam had set up. There it all was. Hundreds of messages between Julia and Alex. Reading through them, I saw the whole story unfold in excruciating detail. There were the early messages, flirtatious and cautious. Then, as their affair deepened, the language became bolder, more intimate. There were plans to meet, excuses crafted carefully to cover their tracks, and even discussions of our future. Every line I read fueled my resolve. The worst part was finding their actual plans for a life together, funded by money siphoned off from our joint account. They weren't just having an affair, they were setting up a nest egg to start fresh somewhere else, free from any financial obligations to me. Julia had even begun the process of moving her name off our shared mortgage to keep her hands clean in case I filed for divorce. She was clearly preparing to walk away with Alex and leave me with the debts. A wave of fury swept over me. But instead of dwelling on it, I put my plan into action. The first step was simple: stop the money flow. I transferred every penny in our joint account into a new one in my name only. Then I canceled every credit card linked to her and froze the shared investment accounts. She would have no access to the money she was planning to use with Alex. I watched with satisfaction as the accounts dropped to zero, effectively freezing her out. But I wasn't done. I spent the next day making a series of small but deliberate purchases. Jewelry, high-end electronics, and some gifts I thought would suit a soon-to-be divorced man just fine. All things I could later resell, and all on her credit card so the charges wouldn't come up until after the dust had settled. If Julia thought she'd drained our resources for her personal escape plan, she was sorely mistaken. The following week, I finally let her in on my findings, but with a twist. I'd been biding my time, waiting for the right moment, and tonight was it. We were sitting in the living room when I brought up the subject. "So, Julia," I began, feigning a casual tone, "I was thinking about the next steps you mentioned. Moving on and all that." She looked at me surprised, but smiled slightly, thinking I was finally going along with it. "I think that's a good idea," she said. "It's healthy." "Exactly," I replied, nodding as if we were two mature adults calmly parting ways. "So I took the liberty of handling some things on our behalf." A hint of worry flickered in her eyes. "What do you mean?" I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, showing her the empty joint account. "I moved all of our shared money to protect us during this transition," I said smoothly. "Thought it might be safer." Her face went pale. "Mike, what did you do?" "Oh, don't worry. The funds are still here," I said, holding her gaze with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Just in an account you can't access." Her voice was trembling now. "You had no right." No right, I interrupted, my voice rising. You mean like the right you had to sneak behind my back for months, pulling money out of our account to play house with your boy toy? She stared at me, her face a mixture of shock and anger, but she didn't deny it. And just to make sure you don't play any more games, I continued, I've frozen all the investment accounts too. Consider it insurance. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. I watched her struggle, trying to come up with something, but the truth was out, and there was nothing she could say to take it back. You've been planning this, haven't you? She whispered finally, her voice laced with bitterness. I didn't answer her directly. Instead, I calmly continued, Julia, it's over. You wanted to leave me for him, right? Then go, but don't expect a single cent from me. Her face twisted with fury, and for the first time I saw her mask slip. She wasn't the woman I thought I knew. There was no remorse, no shame, only anger that she hadn't gotten away with it. Julia was speechless. She sat there, staring at me, processing what I'd done, but behind the anger on her face I saw something else. Panic. You're not being fair, she finally stammered, her voice unsteady. I'm still entitled to half of what we've built together. I almost laughed. Fair? She wanted to talk about fairness after lying to me, draining our accounts, and planning her new life with Alex? But I held back my anger. I wanted her to feel the impact of my calm response. Fair? I echoed, my tone deadly calm. Fair is me letting you walk away without any of the money you tried to steal from me. Fair is you getting exactly what you gave me, a fresh start with nothing. Her face crumpled. For the first time I saw real fear in her eyes. She opened her mouth, probably to argue, but she didn't get the chance. I continued, cutting her off. Oh, and one more thing, I said, my voice cold. You and Alex won't be needing that nest egg, because I know exactly where you were putting it. I found the account, Julia. Her face turned ashen and she slumped back into her seat, eyes wide with shock. But how did you... That's not your concern. What you need to know is that it's over. There's no future with him, not with my money. I relished every word. Every moment of panic in her eyes felt like a small slice of justice for the pain she'd caused. And then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed on the table between us. We both stared at it for a moment, and when she didn't make a move to grab it, I picked it up and checked the screen. It was a message from Alex. I read it out loud. Hey babe, when are we moving forward with the plan? I'm ready whenever you are. Love you. The silence that followed was deafening. Julia's eyes were glued to the floor, her hands shaking. The lie was fully exposed, laid bare between us. And with the truth now out, she had nothing left to hide behind. I wanted to walk away right then and there, but I wasn't finished yet. Here's what's going to happen, I said, each word deliberate, precise. You're going to sign over any claim you think you have to this house, and you'll be leaving by the end of the week. I'll be filing for divorce, and you can go live with Alex and see how long he sticks around once he realizes you have nothing. She looked up at me, and in her eyes I saw a strange mix of anger and desperation. You can't do this to me, Mike. You can't just cut me out of my own life. This is my life, Julia. You're the one who walked away from it when you decided to betray me. So yes, I can, and I will. I held her gaze, daring her to argue, but she didn't say anything. She knew I had her cornered. Just when I thought she couldn't possibly sink any lower, she surprised me. Fine, she spat, her tone cold and venomous. You want me gone? I'll leave, but don't think for a second that you're coming out of this clean. I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are. You think you're some kind of hero protecting your precious money? Well, newsflash, I'm not the only one who can play dirty. Her words hit me like a slap, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I laughed. Oh, go ahead, Julia. Tell anyone you want. As far as I'm concerned, I have nothing left to hide. But you're going to have a hard time explaining why you and Alex were funneling money out of our accounts to fund your little affair. Her face twisted with anger, but she knew she'd lost. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her, leaving me alone to let the reality of what had just happened sink in. I felt strange. A part of me was exhilarated, having taken control, having set things right in my own way. But another part of me felt empty, hollow. I had loved this woman once, trusted her completely. And now, I didn't even recognize the person I'd been married to. A few days later, after she had packed her things and left, I found a final parting gift from her. A legal letter claiming she was entitled to half of our assets and demanding alimony. I almost laughed. But as I sat there, staring at the letter, I realized that Julia was desperate. She had nothing now. Her relationship with Alex would fizzle out once he realized she couldn't fund their plans. She had gambled everything and lost. Still, her audacity left me in disbelief. Did she really think she could try to squeeze money out of me after everything she'd done? And that's when my final idea came to me, the perfect way to end this chapter on my terms. With Julia's final attempt to squeeze money out of me through that legal letter, I knew I had one last move to make. I wasn't about to sit back and let her use the system to get even more out of me. If she thought she could just waltz off into the sunset with half of everything, she was in for a rude awakening. I met with my lawyer the next morning. He'd handled dozens of messy divorces, but when I laid out Julia's actions, her affair, the secret bank account, the attempted siphoning of funds, his eyes lit up. He assured me that Julia's demand was unlikely to hold up in court given the evidence we'd compiled. In fact, he was confident we'd be able to pursue a case of marital misconduct, which could eliminate her claim to alimony entirely. But it was going to take time, and I didn't want Julia to get a single cent until the process was over. Then I remembered one last thing. Alex's workplace. He worked for a mid-sized tech company, and one of the few perks Julia would casually brag about was that he had a clean image. Their budding romance was a carefully hidden secret. So, with my lawyer's approval, I set my next plan into motion. I started by emailing copies of Julia's and Alex's texts to the company's HR department anonymously. The emails contained more than enough context to suggest an ongoing affair, plus the specific details about the joint account they were using to prepare for their new life together. I knew the company had strict policies about inappropriate workplace conduct and relationships that created conflicts of interest. It didn't take long before I got word from a contact at the company that the emails had created quite the stir. Days later, Julia called me in a fury. "What did you do, Mike?" she shouted over the phone, her voice trembling with rage. "Alex lost his job." I couldn't help the smile spreading across my face. "Oh, did he? I thought he had you to take care of him now." She was silent, seething. I knew then that her little fairy tale with Alex was crumbling faster than she'd ever expected. "Oh, and one more thing," I added, relishing the chance to deliver my final blow. "I've filed for a divorce under grounds of marital misconduct. You'll get nothing from me, Julia. No alimony, no assets, nothing. You wanted to walk away from this marriage? Fine, but you'll be doing it with empty hands." You can't do that," she stammered, desperation creeping into her voice. "Oh, I absolutely can, and I will." The satisfaction in my voice must have been clear. Good luck with your fresh start. For weeks after that call, I kept waiting for some final plea from Julia, an attempt to reconcile or perhaps manipulate me into giving her some last piece of what we'd built together, but it never came. I soon learned that Alex had ended things with her shortly after his firing. He had no interest in a relationship that had left him jobless and vulnerable, especially now that Julia had nothing to offer. In the months that followed, the divorce was finalized with the terms I wanted. Julia walked away empty-handed, left with nothing but the wreckage of her plans. I'd been fully reimbursed for the money she'd siphoned off, thanks to the court's ruling, and I'd even managed to recover some of the charges she'd placed on my credit card before she left. A year later, I moved on. I sold the house, relocating to a new city for a fresh start of my own. I didn't dwell on Julia or the betrayal any longer. That chapter of my life was closed. It had taken a toll, no doubt, but I came out stronger, wiser, and most importantly, free. Some might say my revenge was extreme, but in my eyes, it was justice. And as for Julia, last I heard, she was moving from one odd job to the next, struggling to keep herself afloat. Her plans of living large with Alex had blown up spectacularly, and her once secure, comfortable life had vanished. There was a certain satisfaction in that knowledge, though I didn't let it define me. In the end, the revenge was perfect, not because it was sweet, but because it was final. And I was finally free.